Okay, for this lecture on America's involvement in World War II, I'm just going to use a short PowerPoint here or slideshow, and I'm calling this the time between the wars, isolation and intervention. What we're looking at here is the 2 decades before America gets involved in World War II. These are the 1920s and 1930s. Now, we covered these in units before earlier in the school year. Uh, and we know that the 1920s was a very booming economy, and the 1930s was the Great Depression. What we didn't look at was America's involvement in the rest of the world. So, I guess the first thing to remind you guys is that the US refused to join the League of Nations. If you remember, at the end of World War I, Woodrow Wilson advocated for the United States to join a League of Nations. However, this was rejected by the American Congress and really by the American people. This little excerpt on the screen is Warren Harding, who is going to win the presidency in 1920. He's a candidate and he's running for president. And if you notice that he's like, I oppose the League of Nations. Um, um, I don't want to clarify these obligations. I want to turn my back on them. He feels that America has done its part for the world and doesn't have further obligations. And to join the League of Nations would drag America into unwanted foreign affairs. Um, Warren Harding said that America was actually returning to normalcy. And so, in many ways, the 1920s and 1930s are America withdrawing from involvement in the rest of the world, and we call this isolationism. However, while America is withdrawing, many other nations are getting leadership who is more aggressive, more expansionist, and more dictatorial. If you also remember from the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to pay a huge sum of money in reparation for World War I damages. This wrecks the German economy. And then the Great Depression, which is a worldwide depression, wrecks the global economy. It exacerbates things in Germany, and countries are in need of control and rebuilding and stability. And in places like Germany, Italy, and Japan, dictators will come to power advocating central planning, fascism, totalitarianism, essentially saying, look, society is a mess and we have um, answers and we have solutions, and these dictators began to expand. Germany begins to be territorially aggressive in Europe. Italy begins to expand in Europe and Africa. Japan begins to expand out and try to build an empire in the Pacific Ocean and Southeast Asia. And these developments begged for U.S. intervention. If you look at this excerpt at the bottom, this is from the New York Times in 1930. So we're kind of right in the middle of this time between the wars. And this correspondent says officially, our government stays out. We continue to shy at the World Court. But such things count for less and less. We must deal with the world, and the world must deal with us. He goes on to say, if there's a conference, the United States has to be there. If an international bank is set up, an American is made president. If the court meets, an American is put on the bench. In other words, America can say that we want to withdraw and be isolationist. But as these dictators become more and more aggressive, as world issues become more pressing, it almost requires the United States to intervene. Um, it's like the Spider-Man quote: "With great power comes great responsibility." America has become a powerful, if not the most powerful nation in the world at this point in the 1930s. But do we want the responsibility of intervening and policing? Um, Most American people say no. Even up to 1940, So if you look at these two excerpts, we're in the summer of 1940, and the American people want to stay out. Um, by 1940, World War II has actually already started. Hitler and the German army invaded Poland in September of 1939, and that really begins the war. By June of 1940, Hitler and the German army have conquered most of Europe and have occupied France. France has fallen to the Nazis. But even here, the American people want to stay out. You can see this is the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as they're putting together their platforms for the fall election. We haven't talked about this yet, but in 1940, FDR, the president during the New Deal and the Great Depression, is going to run for and win a third term as president. He's the only president to win a third, and then in 1944, a fourth term. Um, but both parties, FDR's Democratic Party, it says, the people are determined that war raging in Europe shall not come to America. The Republican Party is firmly opposed to involving the nation in the foreign war. People on all sides, even by 1940, said, we don't want to be involved in World War II. But FDR feels differently. FDR felt that America must get involved. He's similar to that correspondent for the New York Times. He says America is powerful and we have a responsibility. In the 1930s, there were several neutrality acts that said America wouldn't get involved. But in 1939, at FDR's urging, the neutrality acts began to change. The Neutrality Act of 1939 is known as the cash and carry policy. In other words, the United States would start lending supplies to allied countries if they paid cash and carried the supplies themselves. In other words, the United States did not want to go into debt with other countries or put American ships or American sailors in harm's way. But as long as an allied nation would pay cash and carry supplies themselves, America would begin to get involved in the war. This was a gradual move from isolation to intervention. Also in 1940, or in addition, in 1940, FDR signed what was called the Atlantic Charter. This was a secret meeting that FDR had with Great Britain and their leader, Winston Churchill. They agreed on the principles of the war and even on what the goals should be for the outcome of the war. And this is interesting because, again, this took place in August, and the American people don't want to be involved in the war. And FDR is secretly negotiating behind the scenes, saying, hey, we're on your side. We agree with your ideas, and we're going to help you make this happen. The next year, the Lend-Lease Act, I don't have it on here, but in 1941, FDR gets Congress to pass the Lend-Lease Act, which says, out in the open. This is not cash and carry. This is not a secret thing. This is a very public thing that America will provide weapons and supplies to the allied nations who were fighting against Germany, Italy, and Japan. FDR, in a speech, said that America would be the arsenal of democracy. So what you see in this time between the wars is America is in tension with itself. Should we withdraw? Should we get involved? Even by 1940, when the Nazis and other dictators became aggressive, America was still, the American public was still wanting to stay out. All of this was before America was attacked at Pearl Harbor. But the attack on Pearl Harbor changes everything. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Air Force attacks the American military base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. FDR called this a date that will live in infamy. This brings America fully into World War II and completely changes public opinion in favor of intervention. America is going to declare war, and we're going to be fully in at the end of 1941 and at the beginning of 1942. We'll talk more about how the war goes and some of the developments around the world and on the American home front in a future lecture. Thanks for watching.